This episode of Hello PhD is sponsored by Promega and listeners like you. Thanks for your support.
The food pyramid suddenly sprouts arms and has a beer in one hand and a glass of wine.
Yeah. Food pyramid with a shot balancing on top. We don't wildly speculate on this show except for the first half and the second half. Welcome to Hello PhD, a podcast for scientists and the people who love them. This week, we talk about PhD coursework. Does it really matter? Stay with us.
And we're back. This is Hello PhD, episode 94. I'm Joshua Hall.
And I'm Daniel Arneman.
And we'll discuss the human side of science and life in the lab. Good evening, Dan.
Hey, Josh. Finally back together again in the studio. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a great evening, a warm summer night here in North Carolina.
Yeah, but not quite so gross as it sometimes gets this time of year. So I was pleased for a little bit less humidity.
Yeah, plenty of humidity to come. I was actually in the mountains this past weekend, and it was so awesome for the evenings and the mornings to actually be cool before the heat of the day. That's the one thing we kind of miss.
It's what I miss about living in the north is the jacket. You have to take the jacket in the morning. Yeah. Or if you go outside at night, you're actually cold.
Yeah, here you walk out the door at 8 a.m. and you're like, that's hot.
Well, and the blanket of mosquitoes usually keeps me pretty warm here, so that's nice.
But Dan, to refresh us, we have a really tasty beer, very different than anything we have had on the show before.
Okay, tell me a little bit about it and I'll take a sip.
Well, first, Dan, as we mentioned last week, we have partnered with our friends at Promega, and they were kind enough, Dan. I got home yesterday and had a package on my doorstep from our new friends at Promega, and they sent us this really cool handwritten card and some beers.
And the beer is quite special, so tell me the name of it, and then I will try to describe it.
All right, Dan, this is the Wisconsin Brewing Company Refresh Radler, Grapefruit Radler.
And I think your enunciation was good on that. It's not Rattler like the snake.
No snakes.
Radler.
I hate snakes, Dan. I hate them.
Can I tell you the first thing that I taste?
What do you taste?
The first thing that I thought I tasted was grapefruit. But
it says grapefruit.
Yeah, I realized that really should be the second thing I taste. The first thing I taste is sweet. It is a much sweeter... Is it a beer or is it some kind of malt liquor they sent us?
I'm glad you asked, Dan. Would you like to know what a radler is?
Is it a thing? It's a defined word? It's not just the name of that?
No. A radler is an actual type of beer drink.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the history is kind of interesting of a radler. So apparently in the 1920s in Germany, there was an innkeeper named Franz Kugler who was in the small town of Diesenhofen. And apparently I learned there was a great cycling boom of the Roaring Twenties. Were you aware of this in Germany?
Of course I'm not. How would I know that?
Apparently on a beautiful day in June in 1922, 13,000 cyclists ended up at Kugler's bar. And
how many?
13,000.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah. And so anyway, he was running out of beer quickly. So
I don't like where this is going, Josh.
So anyway, he apparently had all this lemon soda in the storeroom that he couldn't really get rid of. So he started mixing the beer with this lemon soda, and it actually was a big hit, and the Radler was born.
So a Radler is a mixture of some kind of citrus soda and beer?
That's it, Dan. It's a mixture of a classic lager and a fruit soda.
This is a brand new beverage and a brand new flavor that I don't think I've had before, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and this is actually even cooler. So it turns out this Radler, this Refresh Radler from Wisconsin Brewing Company, was made in partnership with Campus Craft Brewery, which is actually some students at the University of Wisconsin School of Agriculture who every year come up with a beer, and they partner with Wisconsin Brewing Company. They brew it and market it themselves every year, a new beer. This is one of them.
I gotta say, I like it. This is a hot weather. You make this ice cold. You sit on the deck or in the boat or wherever you happen to be. It's kind of low gravity, right? It's 3.2% ABV.
3.2% ABV.
So take this one out on the road with you. I have to tell you, Josh, I had some...
I want to take it on the road with you.
Not on the road. Not on the road.
We do not condone drinking.
Cut that out. on your next trip and then stop somewhere.
When you're cycling.
When you stop.
Yeah,
Yeah,
then
next
it's fine.
cycling trip.
Yeah.
No, it's
Yeah,
probably not. It's probably still illegal,
beer.
isn't it?
This is a cycling beer.
Isn't it still illegal? I don't know.
Probably.
All right. Well, with that, we should move on.
Yeah, so thanks to our friends from Promega for sending the beer.
And Josh, while we are on the topic of Promega, we do want to thank them for the support for this episode. And what they want our listeners to know is that they actually have a technical support team here to answer any kind of random questions that PhD trainees or
You mean random
scientists-
questions like, what's a Radler?
Like, what's a Radler? I don't know if they'll know that, but it's worth asking. I think more like, how do I interpret the results I got from this kit? What reagent should I be using here? What does this step in the protocol mean? They actually have a team of scientists ready to help out other scientists, and you can either call them or reach out to them online. Just go to promega.com/PhD support.
I love that chat technical support.
That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I hate talking on the phone. Dan, I also wanted to thank Irene, our newest Patreon patron.
Thank you, Irene.
Yeah, and we are so thankful for all of our supporters through our Patreon page. If you'd like to become a Patreon patron, you can go to patreon.com/HelloPhD or click the Become a Patron button on our website, and you will get an invitation to our Slack channel just for our Patreon patrons.
Yeah, this week we have been kind of discussing last week's episode about mental health, and we're having an interesting discussion about that last episode. So feel free to become a patron and join that group.
All right, Dan, are you ready for some science in the news?
So ready. All right, Josh, we are a little bit late on the breaking news nature of this story, but I wanted to cover it anyway. And this story actually revolves around ethanol. Who would have guessed?
Oh, good. We haven't talked about ethanol for at least 30 to 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think it's been at least that long. So if you remember, Homer Simpson one time observed that alcohol is the cause of and solution to all life's problems. And that sentiment was not new. I think humans have been consuming fermented beverages that contain alcohol for as long as we have had civilization, 10,000 years. And the relationship over that entire period has been kind of uneasy because we know the upsides, the benefits. People did it to preserve harvests, and they did it to feel good, and they did it to socialize. But we also have, for a long time, really understood the downsides. More recently, we've understood kind of the medical causes of those downsides. So liver and heart disease, birth defects, the number of traffic fatalities that happen around the world due to alcohol, the increases in addiction, the impacts of depression, physical aggression, cancer. These are all the negatives of alcohol, and yet we are a society that still loves it, and we still consider it part of our culture.
It's part of this show every week.
It's part of the show every week. It's part of the graduate school culture. And there has been research more recently that suggests there are some upsides. Maybe there are some benefits to consuming small amounts of alcohol on a regular basis. So there have been observed some improvements in cardiovascular markers, resistance to type 2 diabetes. And there are many observational studies that have found that moderate drinkers outlive teetotalers or abstainers and have less heart disease. But those observational studies can't prove that the alcohol is the reason those people live longer. Maybe there are other factors.
So you're saying sort of these correlations that on average, people who are light to moderate drinkers, social drinkers, if you will, are outliving people that completely abstain.
That is the observation, but of course that could be because those people are in a different socioeconomic background. Maybe they have other habits, like they have a larger friend group or a social structure that's better. So there are confounding variables that are difficult to pull out. And so what the NIH wants to do, I think, is to take those observational studies and come up with a conclusion about it. So they wanted to explore those questions more deeply. And at the end of their study, what they would like to do is to make dietary recommendations. Right now, there is no recommendation that says if you abstain from alcohol, you should start drinking.
Well, that would be crazy, wouldn't it?
It would be totally crazy. They can't make that.
Could you imagine if on the food pyramid, there's like, I'm imagining, you can visualize the food pyramid with the vegetables on the bottom, and the food pyramid suddenly sprouts arms and has a beer in one hand
and
a glass of wine.
Yeah.
I'm going to draw this and send it
Food
in.
pyramid with a shot balancing on top.
FDA, call me.
Yeah. So I don't know that they would take it to that level, but if people could live longer by consuming a small amount of alcohol, if there actually were measurable, demonstrable health benefits, that's something that they could theoretically recommend and maybe recommend it to the groups that would benefit the most. So what they did is they launched a 10-year, $100 million study to enroll 7,000 participants and measure the impact of drinking just one serving of alcohol per day on the cardiovascular health of the patients and the life expectancy. And they called the trial the Moderate Alcohol and Cardiovascular Health Trial, MACH.
How do you get in on this?
Well, Josh, I'm glad you didn't ask, because they started recruiting volunteers in January of this year. And then, this is where the news comes in. Back in March, the New York Times got access to some emails through a Freedom of Information Act request. And what it revealed was that NIH employees had approached executives from Anheuser-Busch, InBev, Heineken, and these other alcohol companies and asked them specifically to donate the money to sponsor this study. So are any warning bells going off in your head?
So theoretically, these companies could have some incentive to the results showing that alcohol indeed was helpful and that this would probably be a way they could boost their sales.
And that's kind of what they were promised. So in some of these emails...
That's what they were promised?
Well, okay.
That's right. Okay, because let me back up. I'm a believer in the NIH and their mission.
Absolutely.
So, and I know budgets are tight with the NIH. And I know a lot of the funding... And I know the NIH has a couple pots of money to draw from. I know they have certainly the public funds that come in through appropriations from Congress, but I also know there's the NIH Foundation, that the NIH actually has a fundraising arm that's able to raise money from private donors. And I assume that's where these funds were coming from. And so, you could see there being a way where the money comes from a certain source, but that's not at all directly linked to the researchers who are doing the study.
Very excellently explained. Thank you for doing that. That's exactly where the money came from. It was these companies were asked to donate through that foundation that you mentioned, and it is a private foundation that supports the NIH. The leaders of the study claim that even though the money was provided by these alcohol companies, just like you said, Josh, they had no part in the design of the study. They wouldn't be able to influence the outcome. But the reason that this is a little bit sticky is because the New York Times reporting revealed that there were a number of meetings and presentations that took place with those investors and the scientist investigators. And what the scientists did at that time, this is back in around 2013 and 2014, that they could provide the evidence that moderate daily drinking is beneficial. So they basically set up the question the same way I did. They said, look, we've got these observational studies, but in order for us to solidly come down on one side of this debate, we've got to do this study. And one of the scientists, in one of the slides that he presented, he said, a definitive clinical trial represents a unique opportunity to show that moderate alcohol consumption is safe and lowers risk of common diseases. That level of evidence is necessary if alcohol is to be recommended as part of a healthy diet. We have strong reason to suspect so, said another slide. And so basically, they weren't promising maybe that this would be the outcome of the study, but in order to convince the donors to donate, they were suggesting pretty specifically that it was likely the outcome would be beneficial to the alcohol industry.
I see. So,
you feel any more nervous or kind of about the same?
I have a hard time believing there were any sort of nefarious intent behind this on the part of the researchers. But I can't imagine this played well with the public when it came out.
That is so true. The NIH has a policy that really prohibits employees from soliciting or suggesting donations that support a specific activity. And so it raises questions basically of the independence of that study if you went out and specifically asked. And the other issue I think that is raised here is that these presentations gave the alcohol industry the opportunity to preview the trial. So they got to meet the investigators who actually eventually got picked to lead the study. They learned about where the clinical sites would be, the number of participants, the length of the trial. They learned that the trial would allow the participants to choose any form of alcohol. It wasn't that a single one, it wasn't going to be a glass of wine study. It was going to be any type of alcohol. It would be
a Bud Light Lime a day for 10 years.
A Radler a day keeps the something away. I don't know what it is. So there's an argument there that by revealing the study logistics, they kind of open themselves up to influence or at least to approval. So if they had said, we're going to do this with 100 million participants and we're only going to research wine, then the funders have the opportunity to say, well, we're not going to fund that. And so you're basically angling for money by matching your trial to what could get funded, which is a little bit weird. On the other side, the counterpoint is that these presentations were made years before the study actually began. And years before the trial design was actually finalized, the investigator called the details in his presentation boilerplate. Like, if I were going to set up a study, here's a way I would do it. So it wasn't like the finalized research.
Like we're going to give these executives from Budweiser the last look at the study and let them make some tweaks to
they
the
don't get
final
to
study
sign
design.
off.
So it wasn't really at that level exactly.
It wasn't at that level, but the executives did know. They did get to meet the scientists, and they did know who they were. So it does open up a chance of influence there. But I think the fact is, it's important research. It's so pervasive in our culture, and the research is so expensive and complex to do that if there can be a way to do this in an unbiased fashion, I think it's a study worth doing. And so Francis Collins, good friend of yours, yeah?
Friend of the show.
Friend of the show. Is he? Why not?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Great. He actually called a halt to the study, and this was just a week or two ago. And the goal is to review the process by which the money was solicited and to review the scientific merit of the study's design. Basically, to go back and say, wait, did the money come with no strings attached? And is the study still worth doing as it's designed? Is it still going to prove what we think it's going to prove, kind of with fresh eyes, looking for any hints of influence? And so I think this is fascinating. They're also looking into whether the NIH has a wider issue with funding sources, and there's some suggestion that they do. For example, there was Dr. Collins rejected plans to use funds from the pharmaceutical industry to research opioid addiction and non-narcotic pain treatments. He said that was too close, that the results of the study might be biased, and even if they weren't biased, the public perception, like you mentioned, Josh, might be affected. But in Senate testimony recently, he said, I'm very concerned this might be the tip of a larger iceberg, adding that his investigators are looking for other examples at the NIH.
Yeah, Dan, this is a tough situation because, in our country, the largest portion of medical research is funded by public funds, by taxpayer dollars, and there certainly are some advantages to doing it that way. As we're seeing, I mean, the biggest one is when the financial capital comes from the taxpayer, then the investigator is freed up from the whims and desires of a private funder. However, as we know, Dan, research dollars from public funds are limited and aren't guaranteed, and so the ability to rely on private money to answer additional research questions could also be very important. So I guess it's an interesting thing to ponder. Are there ways to do it where we can answer more questions, we can fund more science in a way that minimizes bias or conflict of interest?
Yeah, I probably presented this sounding more skeptical than I am. I have to say that after having reviewed Dr. Collins' testimony and looking at how he halted the study until they could investigate it in a more rigorous fashion, and the fact that he said, when questioned by politicians, instead of saying, no, there's no problem, let's move on, fake news, he said, oh, this might actually be a bigger problem and we're going to find out. I think what we're seeing is this eminent scientist is taking a scientific approach. He's saying, if there is an issue, we are going to uncover it. We're not going to be partisan about it. We're not going to try and sweep it under the rug. We're going to go find it and fix it. And I thought it was very refreshing to not have that kind of cover your bum response.
Yeah. This is an important question. Let's find the answer to it.
Isn't that nice?
Wow.
Is something wrong with that?
I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I don't either. So we'll keep an eye on this and present any updates as we hear them. And maybe in 10 years, we'll find out what the answer was.
Well, in the meantime, to try to lessen the burden of funding needed by NIH, I'm going to have a drink a day.
Okay.
And I'm going to keep copious notes.
Good idea. Just
on my
self-study.
health. Yeah. So
you'll have to blind yourself.
I'm fit as a fiddle, Dan.
Yeah. Some days you'll have Radlers where they're 3.2%, and some days...
That's a good point. That's our big difference. If I have this Radler versus I have a triple IPA, 10%.
Huge, yeah.
Some Dragon's Milk.
Oh, man, that one was heavy.
I'm going to mix a Radler with Dragon's Milk and get...
That is disgusting. Stop it.
All right, Dan, let's move on to our topic. Dan, we have a listener question this week.
We got a question from Zachary this week, Josh. Dear Josh and Daniel, I found your show recently while looking for information on imposter syndrome and appreciated listening so much I thought I would send in a question for you to ponder and maybe help me think through from a more distant and objective perspective.
And Dan, actually, that was episodes 70 and 71. If anybody wants to hear that.
Imposter syndrome, yeah. Important topics. Okay. I'm a first-year chemical engineering PhD student, and I'm currently working through a class-filled semester. For 2 of my classes, my midterm grades were much less than desirable for me. Now, I'm not the quickest when it comes to math, so a lower score in classes like transport compared to other students has been the norm, but these scores are even lower than what I usually expect. Nerves have been a typical part of my exam state of mind, but past experience has shown that I can usually overcome them. I feel like I understand the concepts, and my homework and quiz grades for the class would seem to indicate that. However, the tests have gotten the best of me both times. I have to maintain a certain GPA, and while I don't know what the final grades will be yet, I feel like I should be doing better. I guess my real question is, are class grades indicative of whether or not a PhD is right for me? I have a master's and have done research for more than 3 years, so I feel that the actual research portion of the program will not be the issue. And every time I get to talk research with my lab group and new advisor, I love it. For now, it just seems like my grades aren't indicating that I'm a good enough student for the program, and I really don't want that to be the case. I plan on talking to my advisor about it all soon, as well as older grad students. Would appreciate hearing from both of you if you have time, or even being directed to another resource if you have one. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your show.
Yeah, wow. Zachary, thanks for that question. And Dan, this is actually something that I do have some thoughts about.
I would like to hear those thoughts, Josh, because it feels pretty heavy because he's doing well in the research. He loves the research, which we talk about all the time, that if you love research, go do research. This is for you. But these classes, they're getting in the way. And it's not the material, it sounds like. It sounds like he's doing well when he has the time and the ability to do the quizzes and homework on it in his own time. But it's the tests. And the tests take him down. And I think we've all known somebody or we've been that person that experiences that. So do you jump off the rocket ship to your dreams because of those tests?
Well, do you want my quick answer?
You should just say, yep, jump off. That's it.
No.
Okay, great.
Yeah. TLDR, no. But let me unpack that a little bit. So I'm going to get on a little bit of an educational philosophy soapbox for a minute, if that's okay.
Don't get any splinters.
So, and I'm talking about America. I don't know. I can't speak for all countries, but our educational system that I know the most about, we have been for a long time and mostly continue to be, if not even more so, to be very grade and test score centric. Would you say that's true?
I am beginning to notice that as my kids start to be old enough to go to school, and it makes me a little sad. Okay, really sad.
Yeah, I mean, my wife is a high school teacher, and my kids obviously in elementary school, and here in North Carolina at least, they were doing their end of grade testing last week, and that involved like sitting in a room for 3 or 4 hours in the morning, and it's super strict. You can't leave, no phones, no food. But Dan, and especially as you advance from elementary to middle to high school and college especially, can you remember how important grades seemed?
The most important, right? That was the measure.
That was the point, right?
Yeah, whether you were a good human being or not.
Yeah, and I think especially, I'm going to make some assumptions about Zachary and us and other people who are on an educational trajectory that ends them in a science PhD program. Chances are you probably succeeded in some academic setting to some degree at some point. But think about what that really means when you get a good grade on a test in your organic chemistry class. What does that mean? Does that mean you learned organic chemistry the best out of anyone in the class compared to the guy 3 rows back who got a B-? Probably not. I mean, I can remember, Dan, my experience. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. My experience as an undergraduate, I always did pretty well in coursework. Dan, I like games.
You love games.
I love games. And almost everything to me, every challenge or every task that I'm faced with, I look at it and I like to think, how do you win this? And so classes to me, I approached to some degree like a game. Each individual class, I'd take a look at the syllabus and I'd think, what is the win condition of this class? In other words, what do you have to do specifically? What gears do you have to turn to get the best grade in this class?
So what you weren't asking is, how can I just absorb all of the amazing information that I'm so excited to learn?
Yeah, no, it had nothing to do with learning anything
Or
in the
love
class.
of the topic.
And you know what? I did really well at getting good grades. But here's the thing. When I got to graduate school and had my coursework, it was really hard because I realized even though I had had biochemistry before in undergrad, I didn't remember any of it because learning was not the objective. However, even though I feel like I didn't learn a whole lot, if you looked at my transcript, you would have thought I was an ace in biochemistry.
So you figured out the game of testing and you won the game of testing. And I think I was the same way, Josh. It was, I had the ability to memorize the things I needed to memorize up to the moment the test dropped. And then maybe 5 years later, I probably couldn't do it anymore. But
yeah. And so I guess what I'm getting at, to bring this around, I'm saying that we use grades and tests to evaluate performance in coursework. However, we don't necessarily know that getting a good grade in a class actually correlates with the degree to which you have learned something in that class. Does that make sense?
it does. They're not precisely the same thing, although one would imagine you would have to at least cursorily learn the subject in order to get the grade, right?
I mean, I think so, but let's look at Zachary's example. Yeah, he does okay on the homework and the quizzes, but these exams, right, the grade he's getting on these exams doesn't seem to match up with that.
And that's usually most of the grade you get at the end of the year.
Yeah, especially in grad school. And I'll say too, Dan, at the undergraduate level and the high school level too, often the people teaching those classes, in a lot of cases, are people who take teaching, the craft of teaching, very seriously. Not always, but I know a lot of undergraduate lecturers who are very serious about their teaching. And so this conversation about making sure your assessments, your exams, are actually measuring learning objectives that are very clearly laid out to students. This is something that professional educators think a lot about. I know my wife and her colleagues, they talk about this in conferences. They talk about this in meetings. These are things they really try to do.
Pedagogy, we call it.
Exactly. But what do you know about the people who taught your graduate school courses?
They wish they were in lab and they wish they were not standing in front of this class.
Yeah, I mean, especially at a large research institution, it's not their fault, but teaching is not incentivized even in the requirements for them getting tenure. It might be a requirement. Their chair says you have to teach this class, but teaching it well is not necessarily something they are incentivized to spend time to do.
Yeah, what you're not saying is that there aren't good professors at the grad school level, because I had some that were great.
Oh, I did
had
too.
some
I did
terrible, terrible, terrible professors. I had some that...
And you mean in your coursework?
In my coursework, yeah. I had some that knew the subject so well and could explain these complex topics so cleanly with analogies and with examples, and it's stuff that I will remember for the rest of my life because of how they taught it. And then I had some that stood there, read the notes that they had read for the last 50 terms, and everybody was asleep in 5 minutes. So I feel like the range of quality was quite high.
Yeah, but you know what? Did it necessarily matter? Some of those faculty who were the worst had been teaching the class for 10 years before you took it and were probably teaching it 10 years after you left.
Yeah, it didn't change who was teaching. That's true.
So, Dan, you know that I've been involved in research that looks at factors that correlate with how well grad students actually perform in science PhD programs.
I do know that.
And one of the things
You never let me forget it, Josh.
That's all I talk about. If you follow me on Twitter, you wish I'd shut up about it.
That's
probably.
good. It's really good.
But we found that GREs are particularly bad at predicting who will actually do well in a research-based PhD program. And it's not just our research, but lots of different places have done similar studies and found that getting a high GRE score doesn't necessarily correlate with things like getting publications or getting fellowships or passing your prelim.
Time to graduation.
None of these important metrics for how well a graduate student is actually doing in grad school. But there is one feature of performance in grad school that GRE scores do consistently seem to track with, and that is performance in first-year classes or first-year GPA.
Okay, so if you are good at taking the GRE test, you may also be good at taking other tests.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Neat.
And so this is something that's been seen in several different places, several different types of studies. But I feel like there is an important question almost an elephant in the room, I think, that is not being asked. And that is, if the GRE does not correlate with all these measures of how students do in grad school, but the GRE does correlate with how well students do in their first year classes, then is there any correlation between first year classes and how well you actually are going to do as a graduate student?
I think it's a great question. Did you ask that of your data?
No,
you must have it, right? The data.
We haven't looked at that, actually. We haven't really examined that, but my guess would be, I mean, how could it?
I don't know. You should find out.
I should find
out. You don't wildly speculate on this show, except for the first half and the second half.
So I guess thinking about these data that we have seen, this is kind of a roundabout way to address Zachary's question. No, I mean, having struggles on your exams in these courses in no way is indicative of your ability to be a successful researcher. And I think that's, as I'm reading this email, Zachary, you've got everything going for you as far as I'm concerned. And Dan, you mentioned this too.
In terms of career success, in terms of long-term viability in a research-based career. It sounds like he's got what he needs.
Yeah, let's completely wipe the classroom part out of his experience right now and read this email. He's saying, I'm understanding concepts in my classes. I love talking research with my lab group, my new advisor. I love it.
Yeah, it's the enthusiasm that I think I lacked and hurt me, but he's got it. He loves it. It's just these classes.
Yeah. Would you rather, if you were a betting man, Dan, and had
I am,
and you had somebody like Zachary who maybe these classes are are challenging or kind of a struggle, but he's loving lab, he's loving his PI, he's loving the research he's doing, but the classwork not going great.
No, it's specifically tests aren't going great.
Right, you're right. The tests aren't going great. Versus somebody who's killing the coursework. But they're like, hey, you know what? This lab thing,
this is boring. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean,
that sounds like me.
That's true.
Oh, it's funny because it's sad.
But what I'm not saying is that it's not important to pass your classes, because as Zachary mentioned, a lot of times that is a requirement for staying in grad school. But what concerns me is Zachary sounds like he's letting it get him down and questioning his ability to be in the program, which from what I know, from what he told us, I would say, Zachary, you can do it and you should be there, and grades are BS, and I don't know what else to say.
We should probably leave it on that high note. I do want
to grades are BS.
Grades are BS. I don't know what else to say. Drop the mic. I do want to say one thing, because specifically, Zachary, you're talking about the tests, and there is a well-known case where people can have test anxiety, or there can be aspects of the way tests are administered that people with learning differences may not be able to read the questions fast enough, or they feel anxious about the process, or whatever it is. And I think if there's something surrounding testing that particularly activates you or gets you distracted or upset, it'd be worth getting tested for some kind of learning difference, because then you may be able to get access to more time on tests, or access to a different test environment, maybe where it's less distracting, something like that. If that is the case, if you are understanding the concepts, but it's just the moment of getting there and the test distracts you or makes you make mistakes, I think there are ways to work around that.
Yeah, there was a student that I worked with who was in a very similar situation. Things were going really well in the lab, but he was really struggling with some of the exam scores. And all he did was he went up and had a conversation with the instructor in the course, who definitely knew that he was very engaged during the in-class assignments, and he participated in class, but the grades themselves were a struggle. And it turned out one of the things he was having trouble with was finishing in time. This was a timed in-class test. And so the instructor just gave him permission to have additional time. And so he got to take the test in a different room where he had as much time as he needed to complete it. And you know what, Dan? His grades completely went up when just that one portion of the timed aspect was taken away. So, one potentially straightforward piece of advice could be just have a conversation with the instructor of your class and just be really upfront with some of the struggles and tell that person exactly what you told us, that you feel like you're understanding the concepts, but the translation of that understanding to doing well on the exam seems to be a challenge. And you never know. You may, I think most instructors, especially at the graduate school level, they want to help you. They are more concerned with learning than grades.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I want to say, for me, the classes were were valuable because it gave me a broader perspective into fields that I would never have studied in my research topic. I was so focused on a particular protein that I wouldn't have taken the time to go understand how a kidney works, because I wasn't going to collide with that in my work. But by taking those classes, I kind of broadened my scientific training. I had an appreciation for talks that I went to in other departments and with researchers studying other things. So there's value in the content. There's value in the learning. And I think what you're saying, Josh, is the grade itself is not the goal. The learning, the acquisition of knowledge, the expansion of your worldview is what you need out of those classes. That we're not trying to say classes should be cut out of grad school. It's that we should find a way to actually assess learning, not to assess, can you fill out bubble sheets?
I think that's right.
All right, Josh. Well, hopefully that helped Zachary. Zachary, please write to us. Let us know if that kind of addressed your question, or because it's been a little bit of time since you wrote to us, maybe you have done some of these things already. We'd love to hear from you. Other students who maybe have struggled with the same thing and gotten through it, or maybe struggled with the same thing and left the program or didn't get through it. We would love to hear from you to be able to provide your feedback to listeners on what's a very important topic and another way that grad students feel isolated and left out and that nobody else is like them, when it's just not true. Everybody's going through something like this.
Yeah, and I want to say, too, we love it when our listeners write in and ask us questions. So if there's something you're going through and you'd like for us to talk about on the show, we'd love for you to send that question in, and we'll answer it on the show if we can.
All right, Josh, time for some word origins.
All right, let me have it.
The clue last week was, take an umbrella, that heap of clouds means a thunderstorm is headed this way.
Okay. So this is a type of cloud formation?
It is a good guess. It is a type of cloud. Do you have a list of cloud formations off the top of your head?
Okay.
And particularly one that brings thunderstorms.
I think the only one I know is it cumulus?
That is an answer I would accept.
Really?
Yeah.
I think that's the only one. There's one, what is it?
Stratus, Cirrus.
Stratus, yeah.
So the answer I was looking for was cumulonimbus, and that comes from the Latin cumulus, meaning
Cumulonimbus 3000.
Exactly. I think they were Harry Potter brooms, right? The Nimbus 5000 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. So cumulus from Latin meaning a heap, a pile, a mass, or surplus, and nimbus meaning cloud. If you've seen these clouds, they're the really tall ones that look like big puffy cotton balls all stacked up on each other, and then the rain pours down. So we've had some of those in our weather this week, which is where that came from. Okay, Josh, our winner this week, and again, I accepted both cumulus and cumulonimbus because my puzzle was not worded precisely enough to differentiate the two. But the winner this week was Megan from Brown University.
All right, congrats, Megan.
We'll be sending you an Amazon gift card, Josh, and not you, Josh.
Woohoo,
We're going to send it to
right.
Megan, okay? And I will read the clue for next week. Ancient Greeks speculated about a particle so small it was uncuttable. Read it one more time. Ancient Greeks speculated about a particle so small it was uncuttable. Remember, we're looking for a scientific word described by the clue, and once you get it, you'll find the literal meaning of that science word is a phrase in the clue itself. If you think you know the answer, email it to puzzle@hellophd.com. We'll randomly select a winner from all the correct responses and send the lucky puzzler an Amazon gift card.
All right, Dan, thanks for that. If you have a question or a topic idea, we'd love to hear it. You can email us at podcast@hellophd.com, send us a tweet at hellophd, or leave us a message on the Facebook page. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. We love the feedback. If you'd like to support the show, like Irene, you can become a patron. Simply go to our website, hellophd.com, and click on the Become a Patron button, or you can visit patreon.com/hellophd. We would appreciate the beer money and would love to see you in our Slack channel just for our patrons. All right, Dan, I am finishing up this tasty Radler. I don't always finish
This
the beer
may
we
be
drink.
the most ethanol I've seen you drink in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, usually, while we're recording the show, oftentimes, I guess because I'm running my mouth so much, I don't drink a lot of the beer, but you can see my glass, Dan, almost empty.
You did solid work on it. Maybe because it's about half the gravity of a normal beer we drink, you got through more of it. I don't know.
Maybe I'm a Radler guy. So I'm going to finish this last drink, Dan, and then we will get out of here.
We'll see you next time, Josh.